Today's guest, Gemma, is a disability content creator and model and mental health worker. It's a great conversation to have with Gemma today, particularly surrounding what it's like to be an expecting mother with a disability and some of her work within the mental health space and some of the ridiculous questions we get asked as disabled people. I really do hope you enjoy this episode, so please sit back, relax and enjoy. Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Gemma with us. Gemma, do you want to quickly introduce yourself, let everyone know who you are and a bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Gemma, also known as Mrs. Bo Retro. I am the wrong side of 35. I work as a psychiatric nurse, and I am, I write on Instagram and other kind of social media platforms about clothing. I like fashion, life with disability, and I'm also currently 5.5 months pregnant as well, which has added a whole other level to fashion and disability. So yeah, that's me.
Yep. Which we're going to get into. So tell us a bit more about your disabilities, conditions, how it sort of affects you, how you manage with it day to day, and sort of what the daily impacts of it are.
Yeah, sure. So my disabilities weren't formally kind of diagnosed until I was in my early 30s, actually. So as a child, I was always that sickly child. I was always in hospital having asthma attacks, anaphylactic reactions, like I was always falling over, I was always injuring myself. And I think I was at that point just considered to be a twat. That was the diagnosis, was just that I was a clumsy twat, basically. And it never really went beyond that. Until I was in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, and started developing real problems with my back. I was kind of referred through the processes, and then eventually someone went, "Oh, you're really hypermobile," and I was like, "Yeah, is that not normal?" And they were like, "Well, yes and no." And then it kind of, so I was diagnosed with hypermobility syndrome, and then as kind of my back issues progressed, and maybe I wasn't as sensible as I should have been. I had some prolapsed discs in my lower spine, and then during lockdown, I really pushed my luck and decided that it would be a good idea to dig out the patio in my garden so that I didn't have to pay someone else to do it. So I ended up removing a couple of tons of soil, and then really thoroughly fucked my back. So I ended up with something called spondylolisthesis, which is where the vertebrae kind of slip off each other as a result of the prolapsed discs. It was also found that earlier on it had been found that I had what's called a pars defect, which is a vertebrae fracture. Don't know how I did it, as I said, I'm really clumsy, I fall over a lot. So at some point I fractured my lower spine and not noticed. And then it all went kind of further wrong. So in May 2021, after spending nearly a year in bed, I had a spinal fusion. So I had 2 of my discs removed, and 6 pins and bone grafting put into my lower spine. So I've got the kind of 3 levels that are now fused into one level. I get lots of joint pain, as with lots of people. It's kind of hypermobility is a spectrum, but you get some people who are very hypermobile but have no pain with it. I'm one of the unlucky ones, in that I suffer with pain along with my hypermobility. I get pain sort of in my hands, elbows, knees, hips, fall over a lot, trip over anything, trip over flat floors. So I use a variety of mobility aids, kind of between a wheelchair, power chair, walking stick, rollator and crutches. I have one of each.
Look, you got to mix it up sometimes. Like,
I know,
people
right?
underestimate the great thing of having multiple different mobility aids.
Yeah.
Like, it's like having a piece of equipment for every occasion.
Like my wife was like, "Are you actually serious? Are you really getting another thing?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm currently waiting on delivery of. Just ordered a tri ride. We spoke about this before, didn't we? I've ordered a tri ride now. So
awesome.
That'll be here hopefully in 6 weeks. So yeah, just adds to the mobility equipment that's currently taking up loads of space in my house and my car.
Yeah, that's one of the worst things when it comes to disabilities. It's like, it's great having all these pieces of equipment that help you and support you, but the space that they take up is a different kettle of fish. Like, it is just how you find, like, where to put everything. I mean, as well, I've got the added layer of I still live with my parents. There's the added issue of mum going, no, you can't put that there, you got to put that over there, or you can't put it in this room, you got to put it in this. And it's like, oh my God, I need it in a place where I can actually get to it. Not
so your mum's
on 1,500 shelves that I can't reach. Yeah.
So I've got 4 pairs of crutches, and it just drives her mad. And yeah, I said lots of it ends up in my car. She'll put it in my car so that it's kind of not in the house. And yeah,
I get that.
So as well as kind of the high mobility and the spinal stuff, I've also still got chronic brittle asthma, which is generally much better controlled. And apparently I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, but I don't really know, to be honest. I don't know how you separate it all out.
Quite a collection.
Just another thing for them to whack on the end of the list, I think, just to kind of push me out the door.
So how has that affected you over the last few years? Because it must have been quite a steep learning curve of like adapting and overcoming, and not to play into
massively
in disability inspiration form thing.
So I think I first started using mobility aids, it would have been about 4 years ago now. Started to use it, so it was a stick to begin with, and then had to move on to crutches. And it was a massive adjustment. I worried a lot about what other people thought about me. And a lot of this was happening kind of pre-finding other disabled people on social media that I could relate to, so other kind of younger disabled people. And I think because my disability is essentially an invisible disability, I felt it was almost like having to come out repeatedly to people. You know, for like one day I went in with a stick, and then a couple of days later I was okay. They'd be like, oh, you're better now. And then I came back with a stick and they'd be like, oh, what's happened? And having to constantly explain myself. And I deal with that much better now. And the people that know me know that one day I will be using a wheelchair and the next day I could be using crutches. And they're quite used to that. But it has massively changed my life. You know, I went from being relatively able-bodied when my son was born, so he's now 6.5. So it wasn't until he was about 2 that I became, like, technically disabled. So I went from being an able-bodied mum that could, to some degree, kind of chase him and play and carry him and do all of those things to not being able to do that anymore. I think that was the biggest adjustment for me, was in my parenting. And trying to explain it to him as well, like, Mum, I can't do that anymore because of this. And even now, he's got a really great understanding of disability. We talk about it a lot, but it can still be hard for him. He'll be like, "Can we play tag?" And I'm like, "Well, no, not really. That's not really within my remit."
Wait till you get the try right, then you can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to smash it. Like, that's so good.
Poor kid.
I know. But I think on the flip side, there are elements of my disability that he genuinely really enjoys. Like my power chair. He's been driving my power chair since he was 3, and he loves it. Like, it's like his own personal go-kart. The amount of times he's stolen it from me as well. Like, if I've just briefly got out of it, and he will drive off in it. He loves it. So there's or like if I'm in my power chair and he's on his scooter and he gets tired, I can just pull him along next to me. So there's perks, like there's things that he has found to be a benefit. He will proudly tell everyone that his mama is disabled.
But I think as well that's really strong, because I think as well it just gives you that much more awareness of the people around you. It doesn't have to be disability. You're just a lot more socially aware. Like, even my family members are so much more socially aware because of me. They're like, oh, wait, they constantly go everywhere and look at ramps and stuff, but they'll also be more aware of other hidden disabilities like autism and more of your neurodiverse disabilities, because they're in that space. Because there's so much of the issue is around people not knowing what a disabled person is, or like
what they look
that
like,
entails or might entail. Yeah, it's so weird, but it's so weird, but it's a benefit as well. Like, what would you say? Like, parenting wise, how's that whole journey been? I mean, you're about to go through it again with a newborn.
Yeah,
but the first time round, obviously, as you say with Frank, you were sort of more newly diagnosed, for want of a better phrase. What was that like? Because that transition was quite challenging.
So it was really hard, and I think I'm perhaps actually probably more apprehensive this time around. So I didn't carry Frank; my wife carried Frank, and we had been planning to have our second child probably a few years ago, but because my spine collapsed and I had to have surgery, I had to wait a year after my surgery, and then I had to withdraw all my medication. I was on quite a lot of opiate medication. So it took 2 years in total post-surgery to be able to think about having children.
Wow.
And I think when we had Frank, I had no choice about being a disabled parent at that point, because my disability happened after him. Whereas this time I've consciously gone into it as not only as a disabled parent, but as someone who's carrying a child as a disabled parent as well. So that's added an extra layer of kind of complication to it. I've had to think very carefully about how to manage my pain, and because I can't take my normal medications that I would, thinking about my mobility, keeping me and the baby safe. How am I going to manage kind of afterwards? Like, how am I going to carry this child around the house? And I think definitely things could be more difficult. My mobility could be worse. But it's a challenge I'm having to consider. How am I going to push a pushchair? Because if you're in a manual chair, you need both your hands. If I've got a tri-ride, how am I going to have a pushchair in front of me? I've had to, I think it's been more anxiety provoking this time around, because I've gone into it knowing the struggles that I already have. So it's not, and I think in some ways it's good. It's not a shock, and I'm able to prepare for it. And I won't have to be learning as I go along. But I think with Frank, it was more of a gentle progression into disability as well, because things got worse over the space of sort of 3 or 4 years. It wasn't like I didn't have an accident where I woke up one day and was disabled. It was kind of a gradual progression of kind of worsening mobility and increased pain. So that also gave me time to adjust, I think. It wasn't a sudden thing, which I think was helpful.
I think the nice thing as well, I like to think, is often I have these conversations with either new parents or existing parents, or someone's about to go through the journey, and a lot of it comes. It's really interesting to speak to all these different people, and almost all of us have the same concerns. So, like, obviously I've got a different layer because I'm not being the carrier. I just suddenly thought, like, oh my God, like, fitting in a wheelchair while carrying a baby because you're twice the size for 9 months. The idea of that is crazy. But the concern of, like, how the hell am I going to carry a baby? Completely get that. I've got the added thing of I can't turn my wrists over. So then, like, the natural way that you hold a baby doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm always terrified of, like, my random spasms and, like, accidentally dropping the kid. And so that's what goes through my head. So it's nice to know that, like, I think that's the thing, is a lot of the community have similar thought processes of, oh my God, like, there is too much to consider. And then as well, it's your first one, like, going into it as a disabled person. If it's your first one in general, it's such a steep learning curve. I mean, as I say, how are you thinking with the whole wheelchair scenario plus being pregnant? Like, how's that all going to work?
I don't know, really. I mean, at the moment, I still fit in my wheelchair. That's quite handy. But I'm getting big, so I'm 5.5 months now. So I've still got 3.5 months to go. Yeah, 4 months to go roughly. So it's about 16 weeks. I honestly don't know. Like, already getting out of bed is a real challenge. Like, I had a bed rail anyway because I struggled with rolling over. But honestly, it's trying to roll my carcass out of bed is really, really hard work. And the likelihood is that I'm going to have a C-section as well, because where my spine's fused, my back doesn't bend. So I had an appointment with my obstetrician the other last week and was told that, you know, C-section is quite likely to be an option. However, there is also an added layer of complication that they don't know whether they'll be able to get the spinal epidural into my back because of where it's fused, which means that there is a possibility that I may have to have a general anaesthetic and kind of go to sleep and wake up with a baby, which I think it's hard not to feel angry about that in some ways. Like, I feel cross with my disability, potentially robbing me of that experience.
Yeah, you don't really get the magic of, oh, wow, baby, that whole scenario.
But equally, I never thought I was going to be able to carry. So I feel incredibly fortunate that I'm not super old, but I was getting to the point where I was starting to feel like I could hear my eggs dying day by day. So I was starting to worry that A, I wouldn't be physically able to, B, my age was against me. So to even be pregnant in the first place, I know how incredibly fortunate I am. But I think potentially being asleep through the birth is not really what I'd been hoping for. Yeah. So I just need to wait and see.
Keep everything crossed.
We were talking about, thank you. You know, we were talking about the size of like mobility equipment and how much stuff. Like the thought of trying to get a pushchair in my car with a wheelchair and a tri-ride. I've got a Mini. Why did I buy a Mini? Like...
Yeah, this is often what I joke about with Gina and say, like, when we have kids, we're going to need, like, a minibus. Not even a minibus, a minibus with a trailer.
Yeah, where am I going to put everything? Like, honestly, I don't... What I've done for the time being, when baby's really small, is I've just got a couple of slings so that I can be in my wheelchair and just have baby strapped to me. Yeah. But, in the future, like, I have no idea how I'm going to fit all that crap in my car. It's a struggle as it is, trust me, let alone with another car seat and all the rubbish that comes with a baby. Like, they don't travel light, nor do I.
No. I mean, again, it's come back to that thing of, like, at least I'm sitting there going, at least I'm not the only one that thinks it. I often sit there and go, Jesus Christ, there's just so many layers. Yeah.
Honestly, I'm kicking myself for having got a Mini. But, like... In fairness to me, it was 2 years ago that I ordered that car. And at that point, it just wasn't on the cards because I didn't think it was going to happen. I was just post-surgery and, it wasn't my most sensible decision, I'll be honest.
Yeah, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. I mean, you couldn't, as I say, Gina always says to me, this is one of Gina's favourite sayings, which is, you made the best decision you could with the information you had at the time.
I like that. That's good. Yeah.
So, and it's very true. It is very true. Like, oftentimes people beat themselves up. Why didn't I make this decision when I was younger or earlier or whatever? When you're only going off what the information you've got at the time because that's all you know. Like everyone says. Like one of the questions I'm going to ask you later is, what's one piece of advice you give to your younger self?
Yeah.
Everyone asks that question, but realistically, none of us are going to be able to do it.
No.
So, yeah.
No. I think it wouldn't worry me so much if there wasn't such a delay on the ordering of cars. Like, my Motability car took a year to arrive.
Yeah, mine did too. Yeah.
A year?
I ordered mine in February. Actually, mine was a bit earlier. I ordered mine in February and it came in December. So
okay, that's not...
Mine was a tiny bit
mine was a full year. And I've now only had it for a year. So, it was 2 years ago that I ordered it. And I'm like, why didn't I get a Mini? Why didn't I get, like, a massive 4x4? I'm going to have to get really good at Tetris and, like, stacking pushchairs and changing bags amongst wheelchairs. And
you're going to have to get a roof box.
Just the thought of going on holiday. Although, thanks to Gina, she put me in touch with the Proximo, which are doing the Motability Switch scheme. So when we go away in August, we are borrowing a WAV, for 2 weeks.
Nice.
So that's a nice option to be able to have to fit all the crap.
Not to turn this into a promo for Proximo, but I do love getting them because, like, I always love the argument that you have with Mobility, because oftentimes when I end up using Proximo, it's always when, like, oh, my car's broken down, and they always offer me the same thing. Oh, are you, like, first of all, they go, oh, can we give you a normal car? No. What about getting taxis everywhere? And I'm like, if I want to go to Asda on the whim, I don't want to be going, I'm going to get an Uber and deal with the guy going, oh, you're going to scratch my car. Just give me a Proximo car.
Not even you're going to scratch my car, but what's wrong with you? What happened to you?
Yeah.
And all of those wonderful conversations that you inevitably have to have with a taxi driver every time you get in a taxi.
Yep.
It's a no from me.
Yep. No, I just don't like getting, like, I don't mind it so much with when I'm travelling with someone. So, like, if I'm with a friend or with Gina, I don't mind getting in Ubers and stuff because it's not too painful. Whereas, like, the idea of getting in an Uber on my own, just explaining to the guy, like, okay, fold this bit, do this, now do this, now do this.
I hate it. I hate it.
No.
So no, when I was put onto this thing with Proximo, just the thought of being able to go on holiday and just be able to get my chair and all of our bags and our existing child into the car, it just sounds wonderful. So I'm really excited about having that option available to me.
I think it's such a good idea. Such a good idea. Like, it's when Gina said it to me, I was like, yeah, brilliant idea. But also coming back to, like, the weird questions, like, particularly when it comes to taxi drivers, we just touched on that. Do you get any weird ones, like being parents? Like, I always wondered, like, do you get weird and wonderful questions when you're parents and you have a disability?
Probably not so much, to be honest. But my son's like a foghorn, so he almost announces my disability for me wherever I go. Who are like walking to her room and be like, my mum is disabled, she's got a poorly back. So I never need to explain myself when I'm with him.
At least you don't have to say, you can save the energy because you can just point to him and go, can you explain this for me?
It's taken a while to land on the right terminology for things. So when he found out that, when we told him I was pregnant, he spent the first probably 4 weeks going around shouting, my mum is giving birth. And I was like, no, I'm not. Waiting for someone to call an ambulance for me. No, Frank, I'm not giving birth. So once we've got the terminology nailed, so now it's mum is having a baby and it's going to be cut out, is what he likes to tell people.
Oh, okay. It's a bit intense.
Yeah.
And I can imagine he says that point blank, no expression.
No introduction. He'll say it to people we don't even know. Like, he doesn't care. I think I've had some concern when people were first finding out that I was pregnant. There was a lot of, how are you going to manage? I was like, I just will. Like, you just have to, don't you? So there was a lot of kind of concern, like, it's going to be really hard. Like the head tilts and sympathy. But I just you just going to work around it. Like, I'm going to do what I'm able to do.
Yeah, it's new to everyone, so that's what people forget. Is how unless it's your. I mean, it is your second, but also there is extra layers to it as well that makes it very different to the last time. But then if it's your first time, none of you know what you're doing. Like, no one, anyone. Like,
every child is different.
The best handbook in the world. Yeah.
Every child is so different. Yeah. So, the first child can come out and be, completely calm and quiet and sleep, and then the next one doesn't. And, you could say that, you could pose that question to any new parent. How are you going to cope? What are you going to do? Oh my God, do you know what you're letting yourself in for? And I think if any of us thought about it too much, no one would have children because they are a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been the consideration from me and Gina going, because the other thing that comes into it with everything that's going on at the moment is the cost. Like, whenever I think of having, like, maybe we'll have kids, it's like, The cost of it, no, thank you.
It's obscene. I mean, Frank's obviously been in school for 2 years now, but when he was in full-time childcare, we were paying, at one point we were paying £1,020 a month for him to be with a childminder.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's equivalent to my mortgage. It is mind blowing, and yeah, trying to kind of balance that out and work out how we're going to do it. But again, I think equally, if people spent too long thinking about how they're going to afford to have a child, no one would do it because it is terrifying.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, once we'd had Frank and I started paying for childcare, I was like, what was I spending that grand on before? Like, why was I not drinking champagne? And I don't understand. I'm suddenly spending this money on childcare, but I'm sure I wasn't minted.
Yeah, it's looking at like, oh my God, like I didn't realise I was spending so much money on that thing. Why am I spending so much money on that?
I know, and now I've got to suddenly find that money again for childcare again. But it is insanely expensive. And
bringing us swiftly on to content creation.
Plug in those gaps.
So, how did the whole content creation thing come about? Because you've been doing it for quite a while now. You've done some really cool stuff. What made you want to start?
I don't know, really. I've always been a bit of a hustler in terms of I will literally find any niche to make a little bit of extra money. And
love it.
Always above board, always legal. But I've never been adverse to kind of weird and wonderful ways of making money, like selling my slippers on eBay. And that kind of thing.
There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. I think one of my things that I've always wanted to learn is how to flip stuff. Like that is a skill I've always wanted to learn, is how to flip stuff. But I've just always looked at stuff and going, how am I going to make money out of that? Like
the only thing I've ever flipped is my worn shoes, I'll be honest. And that takes very minimal effort. So that was in the past. So I was always kind of like, you know, interested in kind of what was out there. And then I got more and more into kind of fashion and kind of styling and making my own clothes. So started out kind of doing sort of vintage retro fashion blogging. Historically kind of was into more 40s and 50s style, which has kind of evolved to sort of 60s and 70s over the years. I'm not going to lie, part of that is just because 40s and 50s fashion is so ridiculously high maintenance, whereas kind of 60s and 70s is a lot more fun. There's less kind of rules around it. It's just more comfortable, and kind of it fitted in much better with being disabled, because having a spinal injury and wearing a corset was just not, you know.
Yeah, no.
Restrictive clothing just wasn't comfortable anymore, so it's kind of like morphed. So it started off around kind of sewing and vintage fashion. And then obviously as my experiences, my life has changed, and, you know, I became a non-biological parent to Frank, because obviously Hannah carries him, and biology states that we can't both be his biological mother. So that again changed my experiences and my perspective on things. And then becoming disabled. And I've always been a very open book. And I think I also talk about my mental health quite a lot as well. Always, again, right from the beginning, my mental health has been something that I've been quite open with. I'm a psychiatric nurse. I've worked in mental health for 18 years now. It's something I'm very passionate about. So it's kind of something that's been alongside it. And I'm a very open book and want to talk honestly about my experiences and talk about things that maybe make other people uncomfortable. Not to make them uncomfortable, but to kind of help people to relate to certain experiences. To help people to relate to things and you know, oh, I'm experiencing that too, but I wouldn't ever feel comfortable talking about it. And I know that for me, something I've always found really helpful is following other people on social media who have experienced trouble with their mental health or, you know, latterly their physical health, or who have gone through becoming a parent in a same-sex relationship, or just things that can normalise your own personal experiences.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my content has morphed and evolved, yeah, as I have as a person as well. Like, if you were to look all the way back, like 10 years ago, I'm unrecognisable as a person, as most of us are.
I mean,
it's kind of
one of my friends scrolled all the way back on mine, and I was absolutely mortified by what he found. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you just scrolled all the way back. Like, it was predating NQPC, and when I started taking it all seriously, back when it was like my personal account. Oh my God, it was terrible. So
we all know the pain of Facebook time hop memories and stuff, like when it reminds us of statuses that we put up like 15 years ago, and you're like, oh Jesus, what was I thinking? That's so embarrassing. And at the moment, I have left all of my old posts on my account, and it literally is like a story of my progression as a human. And that's not to say it doesn't make me cringe, but things will keep evolving. And I think initially there was a time where I felt very kind of stuck within my Instagram around what I felt I needed to post in order to keep people following, or, you know, to almost like make other people happy, essentially.
That's a big topic I think we should dive into a little bit, is that whole aspect of almost posting because you know that does that's the thing that does well. Because like I've brought up quite a lot on this podcast, that oftentimes within the disabled community, and this goes, to be fair, go for any media, not just disabled media or disability media or whatever you want to call it, that negativity sells, unfortunately. And a lot of the time you see a lot of stuff on the disability feed. It's like, oh my God, why are you guys like, I get it, but stop whinging about the same thing every day. Like, change the tune or change the narrative or do something different, because someone said it to me, hey, if you keep moaning about it, you're moaning to the community that already know the problem's there.
That know it's a problem.
So that's the other end. Yeah.
I think it's difficult. It's very easy to fall into that trap, actually, of just kind of posting what you think people want to see or hear. And it was interesting to me when I announced my pregnancy. I lost about 100 followers within a week or two. And
what the fuck?
Yeah, seriously.
What the fuck?
And it really surprised me. But I think actually pregnancy, particularly within the disabled community, can be quite a polarising issue, because there'll be a portion of people that hate children and like, I don't want to know about your pregnancy, I don't want to know about your baby. There'll be a portion of people that really love children and are interested in following. But there'll also be a portion of people that maybe have always wanted to become parents, haven't been able to, or have struggled, and that for them it's actually a really sensitive subject. And that's something I've tried to acknowledge in terms of my own privilege around, you know, being disabled, but still being able to go through with doing this, and having that opportunity. Because I remember very clearly in kind of the year leading up to my surgery and the year post my surgery, I became very kind of desperate and almost fixated on having a baby. And it would hurt to see other people announcing their pregnancies, because I so badly wanted that for myself. So, you know, there were probably times where I muted people on social media, or, you know, didn't want to look so much because it was upsetting. But I don't think I was quite prepared to lose 100 followers in a week or two after announcing my pregnancy. And it was hard not to have feelings about that.
I would have thought it would go up.
Yeah,
I would have thought
it went the other way.
Someone would have found it, been able to follow your story. Like, that would have been my thought process. I would have been like,
No.
I can see me in 10 years' time, like, loving the fact that you've been able to, because then I'm like, right, I've got someone to follow. I can just copy what they're doing.
And I wasn't expecting it to cause things to like get massively big. I just wasn't expecting that. And I also wasn't expecting my own reaction to that as well. I found it quite upsetting. And that sounds incredibly vain and slightly pathetic, but it was upsetting because I'd worked hard to kind of build up a following and, you know, keep people engaged. And so to lose that many people in the space of a week or two was disheartening, and it then made me question whether I should be sharing anything about my pregnancy. So actually, although I've talked about it quite a lot today, if you were to look at my social media, there isn't a huge amount on there. Like, considering it's been 5.5 months already, there isn't loads of content on there, partly because I almost don't want to provoke the loss of more followers. And again, that's really sad. I'm restricting myself from talking about something that is so central to my life at the moment, that is, you know, everything is currently revolving around it. But I'm almost censoring myself because I don't want to piss people off, and I don't want to cause like this mass exodus of people going, because then, you know, there is parts of social media that I do rely on, and I enjoy it as well. And, you know, if you lose followers, you end up losing engagement from brands and businesses. And
I think the hardest thing when it comes to social media and being a content creator is so many people see it as like it's a vain thing. It's a thing like you're just posting pictures about yourself. I mean, I'll use my dad, for example, not in that extreme. But my dad always says, you get paid to post pictures on face wash. And I'm like, okay, there's so many things wrong with that sentence. But technically, yes. But then I think as well, too many people think that, like, you get paid, like, every post. And that's the thing is, like, yes, there's the added bonus of once you get to a certain point, some brands start getting involved and there is some sponsorship there and some money that you can make. But the problem is, so much of that means that then you start thinking how social media is a business and how your follower count and your interactions impact what possibilities are out there for you to grow, to build the business. And then it's a really hard one because, like, people go, oh, but, like, you should be getting paid to do this. I'm like, we don't do it. Like, it's not a vain thing. A lot of, particularly in the disability space, we want to do it to support the community, for the younger community that are younger than us and we're further down the line than they are, to say, look, you can still do everything you want to do. You just got to do it in a weird and wonderful way. And that's what we're trying to do. It's not, oh, yeah, we want to make loads of money. Because let's be honest, the mainstream influencers make far more than we do any day of the week. So,
I mean, the amount of paid work I've had is small. But I do it because there's an element of it. A lot of it is unpaid. But because I enjoy working with certain brands. So, you know, there's brands I feel passionate about. I work quite frequently with Snag, and I
was going to say
part of the reason that I've been working with Snag for 2 years now, and part of the reason that kind of relationship has continued is because I really strongly believe in them as a brand, and even when I get emails from companies that are potentially offering a payment. If it's not something I will use, if it's not something that I believe in, if it's not something I see value in, I absolutely won't do it, because I can't be sat there essentially trying to sell things to someone if I think it's crap or I wouldn't use it. But as a Snag, I love everything that Snag stands for. You know, their advocacy for the disabled community, their advocacy for the LGBT community, you know, for people who are fat. Just everything about them as a brand is just so beautiful. So there are a couple of, you know, brands that I do have sustained relationships with, and that's not necessarily because of financial incentive, but it's because I value what they're kind of putting out there.
Yeah, but it's also a credit to yourself as well, because a lot of brands that you can work with and build those relationships with that are lasting is because you both connect on a certain level, because one, you believe in the brand, but they believe in you. But then there's also like a personal connection with the brand because they can see that you're behind it. that's the thing.
Yeah.
I know, I mean, I'm not a user of Snag Tights, but
You're
I know
not?
that they're really popular. No, funny that.
I really recommend their chub rubs.
I don't think anyone, like, I can just see it now, trying to get my feet into a... No. Bad idea. No, thank you. But Gina, on the other hand, she loves them. Her friends love them. But then that just shows, because also, the people that I do know that love Snag Tights are from all different walks of life, all different types of people. And it's exactly what you're saying. Is you can clearly see that they do, I can't think of what the words, but they do as they say. So, like, it's not, but then that goes for the same for social media. A lot of creators are that way inclined in terms of, a lot of us, we will only work with brands that we believe in, because at the end of the day, there's no point in selling something that you're not going to use, because you're not going to be able to sell it. Oh yeah, I remember I used this app one time.
Or, like, can you imagine me trying to sell running trainers or something? Like, it just comes across as so disingenuous. I can't cope with people selling stuff that they clearly don't use.
It's like me being a flipping Victoria's Secret model.
You know, I did think that when I first saw you. You've got more chance of that than me selling running shoes.
Well, I think if I got in the room for Victoria's Secret, it'd purely be the fact that I'm ginger. That would be it. That would be the only reason.
So, but when you develop these relationships with brands, like, you almost feel that you don't want to let them down. So I don't ever want to post anything that's controversial anyway. That's not really me. I'm not, although I'm open and honest, I'm not a person that particularly likes controversy, and I don't like confrontation. So I don't share that sort of stuff anyway. But I don't want to share things that are then going to reduce my following and potentially then impact on the brands that I work with. So it's a really tough one. I said I don't want to have to hide my pregnancy or hide this experience. But I've definitely found myself censoring myself around it and worrying about how much I share because of that. And, I mean, that's quite sad, actually.
It is really
because
sad.
Then that's not me being true to myself.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. You're not being authentic to yourself, and you're not sharing your journey. Because a lot of doing the social media stuff is also, it's that nice bit of being able to flip back and be like, oh yeah, do you remember when we did that thing, or we went to this place, and it's that's another element of it. So it is, I can imagine, really hard to try and shelter that or shelf that part of your life and be like, I'm not going to mention this on social media, even though social media is such a big part of my life.
Yeah, and it's also very hard not to feel that you need to emulate other influencers or disability posters, because it can be frustrating when you see people that are doing very similar things to you, whose kind of profile explodes overnight and they build up massive traction, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? And I don't want to be famous. It's not about that at all, but when you're trying to share a message or something, you want it to get to the right people. So it can be really disheartening when you put things out and it doesn't land properly, or it doesn't get the reach because of Instagram, or because it's just shit content. There's entirely that's an option as well. Maybe I'm just putting out shit content.
I think one of the biggest frustrations with it all is, like you say, it's that whole thing of, at the end of the day, the reason why most people want the reach isn't because they want their profiles to do well, but most of them don't want the fame. It's just to be able to get the message out there. And it's also, on another scale, I always think of it as, they want the extra reach because then that can get them in the room with some people that can make the decision. But that's the problem.
Opportunities,
we're never
definitely.
So that's a big part of it. And then the added layer, particularly when it comes to, both of us are quite big creators when it comes to Instagram, the fact that you can post something, you have 6,000, 8,000 followers, and it gets shown to 300 people, and you're like, what? Wait, how does that even work?
When you've put time and effort into creating something as well, like the concept behind it and putting it together. And I'm crap. I hate reels. I hate doing videos. Like, it makes me uncomfortable. but constantly being told, you know, that's how to improve the reach and stuff, and that's what people want to see. So I try and push myself to do it. And then it's incredibly disheartening when you put that stuff out and actually it just flops completely. And there is an element of questioning. Is it because it's not been shown to anyone? Is it because it's just shit content? Like, and why is it that someone else could put out the same video, potentially very similar, and it would be received very differently or shared very differently? But yeah, you know, I wish all the best to all the other creators. I think it's lovely. Like, I'm the biggest like cheerleader of people within the disabled community, within the LGBT community, etc. But it is always a little bit frustrating when you see other people's accounts just kind of said like blow up overnight, and you feel like you're doing the same thing, and like, why is it not happening? It's hard not to sound bitter.
Well,
I sound like a bitter woman. I'm not.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I get exactly what you mean. To give you a real world example, so this post, I didn't intentionally, like, I didn't think it was going to do well. I just kind of posted it as a bit of fun. It was literally me changing from a pair of joggers into a suit in time of music. Didn't think anything of it. It got over 1 million views. Work that one out.
Wow.
So fast forward a year down the line, I post the same video and it gets 75 likes and about 400 views, and you're just like, wait, what?
It is so frustrating, and it's hard not to have moments where I'm like, why am I even bothering with this? Like, I lose followers because I'm pregnant. Things don't get the views that you hope. It's like, and then I have to remind myself that actually I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it because I enjoy it, and I'm doing it because even if, you know, the things I'm sharing about mental health or about disability or about being a disabled parent, any of that, if any of it strikes one person and makes them feel less alone and like they, you know, they're going to be okay, then I'm here for that. Like, literally one person is all it takes.
My biggest moments I enjoy are when you get random messages from a mum, a child, a young person that's got a same condition as me or completely different, and goes, you've really helped me see that these things are possible. Though that's the golden ticket. It's nothing to do with like money that you make from it. That's the bit where you go, actually, I'm doing something that's worth it. That is really worth it.
No, definitely. And I think, you know, obviously, although I'm a psychiatric nurse by background, I now work in NHS management, so I don't have as much kind of direct client contact as I used to. I tend to only really have contact with patients when they're angry and they're making complaints. So it is really nice to have that connection with people still, where you feel like you've made a difference or like you've helped people to feel normal, whatever that is, but help them to normalise their experiences and to realise that they're not alone. So there's definitely a crossover between kind of the stuff that I do on social media and me as a nurse, as a person, and just helping people feel less alone. It's not about money. It's like at all.
No.
You know, content and etc. would never ever be a viable career for me, but it's something I enjoy because it is another forum with which I can kind of reach and support people.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've made lovely friends through social media as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like that's why I love doing this, because it's almost like I say it's like speed dating with friends, because like there's all these people like you're commenting on their stuff, you're liking their stuff, but you never actually very rarely get to sit down with them and just actually chat and just go, so what's going on here? What are you doing here? Like, how's life? How's everything going? So it's really nice to be able to do that on this platform. Yeah. But coming back to, like you mentioned a couple of times, you work in the mental health space. I just wanted to get like your perspective on, there's a lot of talk in that area at the moment. There has been for a number of years. The numbers are on the rise. Yeah, just your general thoughts on where that area is going, where you'd hope it would go.
Our services are inundated and it's very different. So I started nursing when I was 18. So 18 years ago, I went into nursing, and things are unrecognisable in that time. Our referral levels are up. I can't recruit nurses. I can't you know, recruit and retain staff. I've got people having to leave my team because they can no longer afford to live in the area. You know, therefore we're losing staff because of cost of living, and it's just a constant cycle, and it's hard not to feel incredibly hopeless. But I feel very passionately about the NHS. The NHS has saved my life more times than I can count, from asthma attacks and anaphylaxis and, you know, various other stupid things that I've done to myself. So I'm incredibly passionate about it from that stance, but it's also been in my employer for 20 years. And I think the NHS gets completely vilified in the media, and it makes me really cross, because there are definitely bad apples in the NHS. You will find bad apples wherever you go. Mm. But actually, I can speak for my team alone, quite a small team, it's about 12 of us. Every single member of my team is there because they genuinely care, and because they genuinely want to make people's lives better, and because it matters to them. And it's, I said, really disheartening to see people leaving the profession because they can't afford to remain in it, or because it's too stressful, and it's just not sustainable anymore. And I've always said that I would leave nursing if I ever lost my compassion. And thankfully, like 18 years down the line, I haven't. But I can see why people do, because it's hard work, and we get shouted at a lot at the moment because the media makes out like, you know, the NHS isn't doing anything, and, you know, they're all just off striking and making TikTok videos, whatever, I don't know. Neither of which I've done, by the way. So, yeah. I don't know. It's such a huge issue, and you know, my 3 or 4 of my closest friends I have met in the NHS, and again, each and every one of those are genuinely there because they care and they love it. And yeah, it's beyond frustrating to see in the media kind of the way that nurses and healthcare professionals are talked about in terms of being money grabbing or lazy, or because it is so far from that. It's just ridiculous. I love my job. I honestly don't know what else I'd do if it was taken away.
With the money thing, I just can't wrap my head around the fact that everyone's going, oh my God, like, why are these people just money grabbing? They do one of the hardest jobs you can possibly do. Like, there are very few that are above that, and I'll openly say on here, I'm a football fan. I love my football. I'm never going to say to a football player, like, why did you take that money? Because let's be honest, if you get offered £100 a week, you're going to take it. I hate that argument because I'm sat there like, anyone would. So, anyway, but the whole crux of the whole problem with the NHS does all come down to money, because it all comes down to funding. If the staff were well paid, they'd stay in the jobs. If they were better funded behind them, they'd have better equipment, better staffing levels, everything becomes less stressful, which then means we get better service. It's not fucking rocket science.
No,
like,
it's not.
I really don't understand. Like, outsiders going, why are you doing this? I was like, oh, it's just so frustrating.
None of us want or expect to be rolling in money. Like, no one goes into working in the NHS because they are money hungry. Trust me. Yeah, that's not a thing. Yeah. My staff, I can only speak for myself and my staff, just want to be able to put a roof over their heads, pay their bills, and look after their children. Like, that's it. Yeah, they just want to be able to afford their rent or their mortgage, and to be able to eat. And you know, there were nurses using food banks. People can dispute that as much as you want, but some of the lower banded nurses were using food banks. And, you know, I know people that have got in significant debt because their wage does not cover their rent and their basic needs. And the problem is, if the people that care leave because they can't afford to be there, you're left with people that don't care. And yeah, so no one goes into it for the money, trust me. I mean, even now, no. So when I did my nurse training, I didn't have to pay fees, and I received a bursary. Now, the average nurse has to pay kind of between £6,000 and £9,000 a year of student fees. They don't get a bursary. You're expected to work for 50% of that. So then you qualify and you're in massive debt already, and you qualify on about £26,000, which is nothing for the shifts that you end up doing and the work that you end up doing.
Yeah, definitely.
It's something I'm very passionate about, and that ultimately we just end up failing patients. So we've got massive waiting lists, but purely because we don't have enough staff and we can't retain people.
Yeah. And I think because I know I've spoken about it on the podcast before, and everyone's going to go, "Oh, but you're always whinging about the service that wheelchair service provide." I know I do, and that is because like it does need to be better. But I know the reason behind it. My thing is with the whole thing is I don't mind so much how long things take because I'm aware of the situation. I've got friends who work in the NHS. I know how the whole thing works. But my big thing is with it communication. If something's going to be 6 months late, just pull the Band-Aid off and tell me. Like, just don't tell me that it's going to be 3 weeks and then all of a sudden I find out it's a year. Like,
I think even my experience as a service user and like someone who's at the end receiving these services and someone who's responsible for delivering the services, I still get frustrated. Like, you know, I had to wait a year for my surgery, which doesn't sound like long, but when you're in pain and you're pretty much bedbound, it's a really long time. And I know the reason for the delays, and I know that it's not the surgeon's fault, and I know that it's not the receptionist's fault. It's still hard not to get frustrated. Post-surgery, referral to pain clinic, a year's wait to see someone to talk about my medication. And, you know, the fact that I work in the services and know why things are going wrong doesn't make that any less frustrating or irritating or demoralising. So I think, you know, people are entitled to get angry. But you just need to kind of retain that understanding that it's not individual staff that are withholding treatment and care. This is a massive systemic problem.
Get angry at the right people.
Yeah. The government, the Prime Minister.
One thing I'm always very mindful of, and I say this to anyone that's a service user at any time in their life, remember, when you're speaking to them on the phone, you might be frustrated. And I don't mind if you need to just let off steam, but please put the disclaimer in front and saying it's not their fault.
This isn't about you.
It's just,
no.
Yeah. It's just, I hate that.
I will listen to patients rant, and I'm okay with it, but like, as long as you know, I'm not the reason the NHS is broken.
Trust
me, bigger
I
than me.
use it myself. It's it's so hard. But also coming back to like mental health as well, in terms of like what you've seen working in the space of like the increase people struggling with their mental health. I mean, we saw it go up drastically during COVID. What's that been like working in the sector? Watching the numbers just creep up and the different scenarios happen and everything else.
Really horrible. It's been really horrible. My service went from not having a waiting list. We have no waiting list. We spoke to every patient within 2 weeks, and we've now got waiting lists of up to between 4 and 6 months. And it's gutting because that's not just a name on a waiting list. Every single one of those people is struggling with their own experiences. And I think there's probably a couple of reasons why we've seen an increase. I think social isolation has increased. So with the rise of social media, social isolation has also increased because people aren't spending so much time together. And, you know, families become more fragmented for lots of reasons because of work and, you know, all of those reasons. The cost of living has had a massive impact on our patients, and we see lots of people who are being made homeless or have lost their job, or their relationships broken down because of the stress of those things. And whilst those are social issues, they massively kind of play into someone's mental health as well. I think there is, in some ways, there is a good element to the increase in the numbers that we're seeing, because it means that people have more awareness and because they are actively seeking help. Because a lot of these people would have been out there anyway, but they would have just been struggling with it on their own because, you know, A, they didn't know that services were available, or B, there was too much shame and stigma attached to seeking help from services. So I think that element is brilliant. It's good that our numbers have gone up because all of those are individual people that are seeking help. What's bad is that we don't have the resource to match it.
Yeah. What about, like, because we see a lot in the media about the increase in mental health difficulties, but particularly in younger people. In terms of that, what's the sort of youngest your service is seeing in terms of accessing your service?
So I don't work in CAMS. I used to work in CAMS. I now work with adult services. So our youngest service users are 17 years and 9 months. However, my son has been under CAMS because we're going through the process of ASD diagnosis at the moment. So I've seen it from that side as well. And we have been in the process for a year now, waiting for looking at diagnosis. And I phoned the service the other day and we've still got another year to wait for that assessment. So that's a 2 to 3 year wait for an autism diagnosis at the moment in children's services.
Yeah, it is.
And the amount of damage and things that can go wrong for a child in 3 years is catastrophic in terms of not receiving the right support, they're not receiving understanding in education, it damaging friendships, the impact it has on the family unit, having to manage all that stuff. I'm not ashamed to say that this is the third time we've tried to record this podcast now. The first time it was cancelled because things were a struggle here with that. And it just wasn't viable to do it. So, yes. I think actually children's services are probably struggling more than adult services at the moment. Like CAMS waiting lists are huge. And I've got friends that work in CAMS within the same trust, and the pressures are just unprecedented. And I wouldn't want to be a child or a teenager in this age. Honestly, I would not. With social media and I wouldn't. Yeah,
there's so much information now growing up that I feel that wasn't there when we grew up, or vice versa. But I think it's a good thing. But then there's just so much in young heads. Like it's like just
and the inability to switch it off as well. Like bullying used to be at school and at school only, and you would come home and you'd be safe. And I think people have access to other people 24/7 now, essentially. So your safe space is no longer your safe space. So I worry for our children in the future for that. But I wouldn't want to be a teenager now. I certainly wouldn't.
No. I think as well there's a lot of that comes into like what's appearing on social media on the more like celebrity side of things, in terms of like we were talking about it in a friend the other day, the fact that like kids that are like 8 want like a Gucci belt and fucking Louis Vuitton shoes and whatever else. It's like, what the
the pressure to have iPhones.
The only thing I was obsessed the only thing I was obsessed with was mum buying me a Red Bull.
I was going to say what happened to Furbies and Tamagotchis, because that was more my level. Yep.
Oh, I used to love Tamagotchis. Oh, Tamagotchi, that's like, that's proper nostalgia.
Oh yeah, leaving it with my mum. In fact, leaving about 4 of them with my mum and expecting her to keep them alive while she was at work. The pressure, honestly.
Coming to a point you said earlier of like wanting to, with your social media, wanting to ask the more not difficult questions, but raise topics that people aren't necessarily speaking about. What's one topic that you feel really strongly about that's not necessarily spoken about as much as you think it should be? Sorry, I put you on the spot with this question. It was just because it popped into my head and I thought, that'd be a good question.
I don't know, really. I think previously I probably would have said about mental health struggles, but I think that that's definitely being spoken about more openly now anyway. I don't know. That's a really tricky question.
That's all right. I've stumped you. That's all right. What about being part of the, I know I apologise, I always get this wrong because I always stumble over my words, LGBTQ plus, technically, I think that's right.
I stop at LGBT just because it's a mouthful and not because I'm discounting anyone. I don't always necessarily feel. I don't always necessarily feel fully qualified to speak on that because I've been with my wife nearly 11 years now. But in that time, we have been incredibly lucky not to experience a huge amount of prejudice or, we've not really experienced much negativity.
That's really good to hear, though, because it shows.
It's lovely.
I mean, I know it's not the case every time, but it shows that the world's growing and becoming more accepting. Again, not all the time. There are cases where that's not the case, but it's nice to hear that someone's gone, actually, it's not too bad. Like, the worst thing is
we're fortunate.
But similarly, people ask me the same question. They're like, oh, do you get much backlash because of your disability, this, that, the other? And part of it's because I think some of it I'm just kind of immune to. I kind of like,
and again, that might be the fact. Like, I've never really given people an opportunity, and I had to out myself straight away going into my job because Frank was 4 months old when I started. So people were like, "Have you got kids?" I'm like, "Yeah, I have. He's 4 months old." And they'd be like, "Why are you at work?" And I'm like, "Well, because I didn't give birth to him. My wife did, so someone's got to come and earn some money." Yeah. So I'm automatically having to out myself constantly. So I don't even bat an eyelid now. We've both been incredibly lucky. Our families have been really accepting. We've never had any issues with our families accepting kind of our choices. We'd both come out prior to meeting each other, and our families were supportive. Our friends have always been supportive. We've had a few odd comments, like people shouting lesbians at us in the street, which I'm just like, where?
Correct.
Just like, what? Is that it? So we've generally been really fortunate. So I don't know. I think I've lived in a bit of a bubble, and I can't really comment on that too much because I'm not having the experiences that lots of people in the community have been having.
People have. Yeah. What about in terms of being a same-sex parent? Like, surely that gets I'm making an assumption, but surely that gets a few strange questions. People being like, "Oh, what the hell?"
Sometimes, I remember very clearly that the first time we took Frank out after he was born, he was probably like a week or two old. We went to Tesco's. And the woman on the counter was like, "Oh, he's so cute." And we're like, "Thanks." And she's like, "Which one of you's is real, Mum?" And we're like, "Are you asking whose vagina he came out of? Why do you need to know that?"
Yeah.
Like,
why do you need to know the deep details? But I'm just sitting there thinking, you wouldn't go up to the guy and be like, "Are you like that?" Just it wouldn't work. You wouldn't go up and be like, "Are you the real dad?" Or like, It doesn't work.
So when I announced my pregnancy at work, one of my colleagues was like, "Oh, is Hannah happy?" And I was like, "Yeah, she was involved." So why would you ask that? I've been asked more times than I care to remember how we were planning to do it, and I'm just like, I wouldn't ask the straight people what position they conceived in.
This is the idea of you just coming home like, "Babe, I'm pregnant."
Like, Hannah, surprise!
Yeah.
It's just, I was like, have you really just asked me that? Yes. Yes, my wife is happy. Yeah. So she was very much involved in the whole process. It was a joint agreement. Like, I didn't slip over in the toilets and have an accident.
Sometimes I wonder about the human race. Like, it does worry me sometimes. Oh dear.
So we've never had any hate, just lots of ignorance or weirdness. I think is probably the better way of viewing it.
But then that comes back to what me and you always talk about. When it comes to disability, it all comes down to a lack of education and a lack of understanding of because people haven't been exposed to different people. Like, I don't actually think No, I don't have any of my friends that are in same-sex relationships currently. Like, they're that way inclined, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're not coupled up yet. There probably will be next week, no, my friends. But yeah, it's just that education and being exposed to it. And I think that's the great thing in the society we're in at the moment. Is like young people are being, in some ways it's a negative, in some ways it's a positive when it comes to relationship wise, but they are being exposed to it earlier, which then means they understand it. They're not. Whoa, what's this big thing? Like, it's not a big thing anymore. I feel like as well, it's slowly, I mean, there's definitely in some communities it's a struggle, but it's slowly getting better, or I hope. I am an outsider. I hope it's getting better for people coming out. Like, I always take the same approach. I hear friends go, "Oh, I'm going to come out." I'm like, is that still a thing? Like, if you come out, like, it's not really,
I feel like you should probably need to announce that you're heterosexual now, to be honest, because I think it isn't such an issue, and I think there's obviously varying layers around it.
Yes.
But I was 14 when I came out, so like,
oh wow, so quite early.
22 years ago, and even then I've not really. I think the other thing that massively helps Hannah and I is that we're both femme presenting as well. So because we both look feminine, that's, I think, has reduced the level of hate. So if either of us were more masc presenting, I think we'd probably get more trouble. And that's really sad.
Well, maybe do you reckon there's an element of like people see you and assume that you're just mates?
Oh yeah, we've been asked if we're sisters before when we've been like holding hands and having a kiss. They'd be like, "Oh, are you two sisters?"
I mean, to be fair, I can relate to that because the amount of times that me and Gina have been asked if we're brother and sister. But
is that just because you're ginger, both of you?
Yeah,
must be related then.
And then the public PDA, the PDA comes out and they're like, "What the fuck?"
We're like, "That's just how we roll here, you know."
Yeah, this is what the Randolph clan do. We just do this. Like, that's just it's the way we work.
I'm disabled. I had to settle for my sister. Yeah, no, we do get asked like, "Oh, are you sisters?" Or like we've been on dates before and people ask if we're sisters or if we're friends. When we were on holiday, we got asked quite a lot if we were sisters. And by the end of the holiday, I was just like, yeah, we are. Just because it was easier than having to explain and watching, obviously, you know, different cultures have different beliefs around that, and having to watch people's faces try and work out what I was saying to them.
Yeah.
And like that Frank is our child. So yeah, by the end of it, I was like, yeah, we're sisters. Yeah. No, I think both our kids are going to be so open-minded just because as a Frank, nothing phases him. Like, he does not bat an eyelid about having two mummies, about one of his mummies being disabled. And he's just very accepting. And I think, you know, I couldn't want anything more from that, to be honest. I think it's lovely.
Amazing.
Like, just the innocence, and kind of to him, it's just completely normal. Like,
yeah.
In fact, I had a call the other week from school because Frank had said to them that, "Oh, the baby might be disabled." So they panicked and were like, "Is everything okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's fine." But Frank's just aware that, you know, sometimes people can be born disabled and that's just life. And they were like, "Oh, okay."
That's cool.
I'm like, that's normal.
Really cool.
Like, it's not a thing. Like, it doesn't matter. Anyone can be disabled. Like, anyone can wake up tomorrow and become disabled.
Yeah, it just shows exactly what I always talk about on this podcast of like kids, just expose them to it early because they just lap it up like a sponge. Like, I love how flipping like point blank, no filter most kids are. Like, I've literally had some kid walked up with, "So what's going on here?" And I'm like, yeah, I have been having that same thought.
If you work it out, let me know.
Yeah.
But I just think if he at 6 years old can grasp that people are different and that, you know, we all have our quirks and we all look different and behave differently, why can adults not get that as well? I don't know. Instead of a 6-year-old could get it.
It's amazing, isn't it? But then it's a credit, no, not blowing your own trumpet, but it's a credit to you guys. Like, it's that whole exposing them to it that early, and obviously you had to, but then also it's being able to have that communication with the kids and say, look, we are different. This is a little bit different. Mummy does this a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And they're like, cool, sweet.
Well, okay.
Can I go back to what I was doing?
He asked us the other week, he heard the word gay on telly. And he went, what does gay mean? Yep. So Hannah explained and sort of said, well, like me and Mama, like is, you know, when two girls or two boys like each other. And he was like, okay. We said, do you have any other questions? And he went, why is everyone in Emmerdale always arguing? And that was literally...
That's the question I asked.
That was it.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
And we were like, okay, yeah.
Yeah. I just love how, like, they're like, cool. Okay.
Yeah, he literally just took it at face value. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, it makes total sense.
It's because society conditions us to make it all complicated.
Yeah. And we still haven't worked out why everyone in Emmerdale's always arguing.
No, I mean, it wouldn't be a soap if everyone wasn't arguing, would it?
Exactly.
I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to hit you with the last question, which I did probably warn you about before the episode started, which is what's one piece of politically correctness that you either really strongly agree with or disagree with? I say that it's more of what's an unpopular opinion that you have, or opinion that you feel really strongly about.
This is really hard because I've already said to you that I don't like being controversial.
It's all right. It doesn't have to be controversial. It can literally be, I don't know, you don't like mushy peas. I've had that before, to be fair.
I have a lot of issues with vegan meat.
Oh, don't get me started.
Okay, so I have got beef with vegan meat. Okay, so I hate mushrooms. I hate fungus, and I cannot fathom why someone would want to eat fungus that has been shaped to look like bacon. It makes me really. I can't. No, you can keep your meat substitutes. I understand people that don't want to eat meat, but don't be trying to pass off meat substitutes as meat. It's fungus masquerading as meat.
Yeah.
There we go. That's something I feel really passionately about.
I often have the same thought. It's like this whole thing of like, if someone wants to give up meat for whatever reason it might be, why do you
and then go buy bacon
that looks like meat? Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I just don't get it. Don't get me wrong. I've had some vegetarians and vegan meals that are great, but when it comes to like, oh, I bought these vegan steaks, it's like it's a bit of beetroot, man. It's not a steak, it's a beetroot. I
know. But I feel very strongly against mushrooms anyway, so I think that's probably fueled it even more.
Oh, yeah.
To have a mushroom masquerading as meat.
Mushrooms are the devil to me. Like, to be honest, I don't mind them too much. Like, if they're in a soup, I can deal with that. It's the texture.
No.
No. No, thank you.
There we go.
I
feel very strongly against meat substitutes.
There we go. You heard it here first, folks. Just wanted to say, like, I always give my guests a chance to plug themselves, what they're working on, what their social media is, anything you want. It's your time to shout and scream about it.
So I'm Mrs. Bo Retro on TikTok and Instagram, and you'll currently find me losing followers because I'm pregnant.
Oh, what a great ending. I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been great. I finally get to record it, even if we've had a couple of tech issues along the way. We got there in the end. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast.
These my dollars make it hurt.